Welcome back to Books on the Mic. We're on chapter 13 now, and we're diving into a book that's all about setting goals and making things happen. If you're enjoying these deep dives, don't forget to hit that subscribe button so you don't miss out on future episodes. Today we're talking about Measure What Matters. It's by John Doerr. It's all about this goal-setting framework called OKRs, that stands for Objectives and Key Results. And it's been used by some pretty big companies like Google and Intel to achieve some pretty incredible things.
It really is fascinating, isn't it, how OKRs can really help you take these really ambitious ideas and actually turn them into actions, Like, everyone has goals, but OKRs actually give you that structure, that framework to make them happen.
And Doerr's book is just packed with examples of this in action. Like Google Chrome, when they first launched, they set an OKR to reach 20 million users. And YouTube, they were aiming for 1 billion hours of watch time every day. These weren't just dreams. They actually achieved those goals using OKRs. Even the Gates Foundation, the one Bill Gates started, they use OKRs in their fight against malaria.
Yeah, and it's really interesting with the Google Chrome example, like 20 million users, that seemed impossible at the time. But what they did, and this is something that Doerr really emphasizes, is they broke that massive goal down into smaller, more manageable steps. And you know what? They ended up exceeding their target.
That's amazing. So in this deep dive, what we're going to do is unpack the core principles behind OKRs. We'll see how you can actually apply them, whether it's to your own work, your personal life, really, anything where you want to achieve some pretty audacious goals. If you're already familiar with SMART goals, you can kind of think of OKRs as taking that concept like a step further.
Absolutely. They're not just about setting goals that are specific, measurable, achievable, relevant, and time-bound. It's about creating a whole system for making sure that everyone is aligned, everyone is accountable, and you actually get those results.
So I guess the first thing we need to tackle is, what exactly are OKRs?
Okay, so at their core, OKRs have two main parts. You have the objective, which is the what. What is it that you want to accomplish, right? And then you have the key results, which are the how. What are the specific measurable steps that you're going to take to achieve that objective?
Okay, so let me try an example. If I wanted to, let's say, write a novel, my objective would be to actually finish the manuscript. And then my key results might be things like, writing a certain number of words each day, or completing maybe like a chapter every week.
Exactly. And each key result should be something you can actually measure. So instead of just saying write regularly, which is pretty vague, you'd make it more specific, like write 500 words per day.
Yes.
That way you can see if you're on track or not.
That makes sense. Now, Doerr talks a lot about Andy Grove in the book. He was the former CEO of Intel, and he played a huge role in shaping OKRs. You might not realize this, but the concept of OKRs actually goes all the way back to the 1970s. It was Andy Grove at Intel who really pioneered this approach.
Yeah, he's often considered the father of OKRs. He implemented them at Intel back in the 70s. And, his methods really influenced the system as we know it today. One really fascinating thing about Grove's approach was his emphasis on self-discipline. He actually had something called Andy's late list. If you came in after 8:05 a.m., your name went on the list. It just highlighted how important it was for everyone to be committed to achieving those goals.
So we've got this basic idea of setting objectives and defining key results. But Doerr goes deeper than that. He talks about how OKRs give you these certain superpowers.
Yeah.
What's the first one we should discuss?
The first superpower is all about focus. Focus and commit to priorities. OKRs really force you to make tough choices. You have to prioritize what really matters. And this is where Doerr's mantra comes in. Ideas are easy. Execution is everything. It's so easy to get caught up brainstorming, coming up with all these ideas. But without focus, without actually executing on them, those ideas just stay ideas.
And to illustrate this point, he uses this great story about Brett Koff. He founded this company called Remind. It's a communication platform for teachers, students, and parents. But what's interesting is that instead of just focusing on building the app, Koff realized that he needed to understand his users. What really stood out to you about this example?
Well, Kopp set a very unconventional goal for a tech startup. His goal was to interview 200 teachers. It wasn't about coding. It wasn't about marketing. It was about truly understanding the problem they were trying to solve. And it was through those interviews that he identified this critical need. Teachers needed a secure, reliable way to communicate with students and parents. And that became the foundation for Remind's success.
So by focusing on that key objective, understanding his users, and executing it in a measurable way, like 200 interviews, he was able to build a product that actually addressed a real need. And I think this is a great takeaway for our listeners. Think about your own projects. Are you spreading yourself too thin? Could focusing on just a few key results unlock greater progress?
Absolutely. It's all about channeling your energies, channeling your resources into the areas that matter most. OKRs give you that framework for making those tough decisions. You commit to the priorities that will actually move the needle.
And that brings us to the second superpower of OKRs, align and connect for teamwork.
Right. One of the key principles of OKRs is transparency. When everyone in the organization can see what the objectives are, what the key results are, it creates this shared understanding. Everyone knows what needs to be accomplished. Everyone's on the same page, working towards the same goals.
It's like no more siloed teams working on projects that might not even align with the company's overall goals.
Yeah.
Doerr uses a really cool analogy to illustrate this. He talks about a football team, the Sandhill Unicorns.
Yeah. He shows how OKRs can actually cascade from the general manager down to the coaches and even the players. So the general manager's objective might be to win the Super Bowl, and that gets translated into specific key results for the coaching staff, and then they break it down even further for the players. So everyone is working towards that same ultimate goal.
It's like this chain reaction of aligned goals all the way from the top down to each individual.
Exactly. And Doerr also gives a real-world example of this with MyFitnessPal, the health and fitness app. And they were growing really rapidly after being acquired by Under Armour. So they needed a way to keep everyone aligned as the team expanded. OKRs gave them that framework. It ensured that everyone was moving in the same direction, even with all the complexities of growth and mergers.
I'm curious, have you ever personally encountered a situation where maybe a lack of alignment kind of hindered progress on a shared goal?
Oh, absolutely. Yeah, it happens all the time, especially in larger organizations. But what's great about OKRs is that they give everyone this clear path. Everyone can see how their individual efforts contribute to the bigger picture. They contribute to the team's success and ultimately the organization's success. It's about creating that shared purpose, that sense of collective achievement.
So it's not just a list of goals. It's really a system for bringing people together, aligning their efforts, creating a roadmap for success, really. So we've got focus, we've got alignment, two really crucial elements for achieving any goal, whether it's big or small. But I have a feeling Doerr has something even more exciting for us. What's the next superpower on our list?
All right, so the third superpower is all about accountability. It's called Track for Accountability. It's not enough to just set goals, right? You have to actually monitor your progress and make adjustments along the way. Imagine it like having a fitness tracker, but for your goals. OKRs encourage you to have these regular check-ins, regular progress reviews, so you're constantly evaluating whether you're on track to meet your key results, and if not, you can identify what needs to change.
So it's not like you wait until the end of the year to see if you've hit your goals. You're constantly tracking, adjusting throughout the year. And Doerr mentions a really cool system for this, right? A color coding system.
Yeah, it's like a traffic light for your goals. Green means you're on track. Yellow means you're facing some challenges, and red signals that you're falling short. It's a quick, easy visual cue to communicate progress and see what needs attention. Even Bill Gates found this helpful at the Gates Foundation. He said it helped him make tough decisions about grant proposals. By clearly defining those objectives and key results, he could really evaluate which projects were most likely to achieve the desired impact.
So OKRs provided him with this framework for accountability, even when he was dealing with complex decisions and a lot of resources. And I think that's a really powerful lesson for everyone. We can bring that same level of rigor and clarity to any goal, whether it's a personal project or a massive initiative.
Exactly. And that's the beauty of OKRs. They can be applied anywhere you're trying to achieve something ambitious. They give you that framework for focus, alignment, and accountability throughout the entire process. So we've talked about 3 superpowers so far: focusing on priorities, aligning for teamwork, and tracking for accountability. But there's a 4th superpower that I think is particularly interesting. It's called stretch for amazing.
Stretch for amazing.
Yeah.
It sounds exciting, but maybe a little intimidating too. What exactly does that mean?
Well, it's all about setting those really ambitious goals, the kind that push you beyond your comfort zone, goals that might even seem impossible at first glance. Doerr believes these stretch goals, as he calls them, are really the key to unlocking extraordinary potential. They can lead to breakthroughs you might not have even imagined.
So it's not just about playing it safe. It's about aiming for something truly remarkable. But I can see how this could be tricky. Isn't there a risk of setting goals that are just too ambitious? like setting ourselves up for failure.
Oh, for sure, there's a balance. Doerr cautions against setting goals that are so far out of reach that they damage credibility and demoralize teams.
Mm.
But he also argues that, with careful consideration, stretch goals can be incredibly energizing. They inspire teams to achieve things they wouldn't have thought possible.
Okay, so how do you walk that line? How do you set ambitious goals without going overboard?
Well, Doerr uses some great examples from Google in the book. One that comes to mind is the launch of Gmail. Back then, most email services offered 2 to 4 megabytes of storage?
Yeah, it was tiny. People were constantly having to delete emails just to make room for new ones.
Exactly. And Google, they initially considered offering 100 megabytes, which was already a huge leap at the time. But then they went for a full gigabyte, up to 500 times more storage than the competition.
Wow. Can you imagine the impact that had?
It was a game changer. Suddenly you could keep all your emails, all your attachments, everything. It set a new standard for the industry, and it really cemented Gmail's position as the leading email platform.
That's a perfect example of a well-crafted stretch goal. It pushed Google beyond those incremental improvements. They delivered something truly remarkable.
Exactly. And there's another great example from Google, the V8 project. They wanted to improve JavaScript performance by, get this, 10 times.
10 times. That's a pretty bold goal.
It was. But not only did they achieve it, they actually surpassed it. They achieved more than a 20x improvement in performance.
Wow. That's what aiming high can do.
It really is. And then there's YouTube. Doerr talks about their goal of reaching 1 billion hours of daily watch time.
Oh, yeah, I remember reading about that. It seemed almost impossible at the time.
It did. But that goal, as audacious as it was, it drove so much growth and innovation.
So it's not just about setting a crazy high number. It's about using that goal to push boundaries and unlock new possibilities.
Exactly. Ambitious goals have this ripple effect. They push teams to think differently, to come up with creative solutions. It creates that hunger for remarkable results.
So far, we've been talking a lot about companies, organizations. But these concepts, they can be applied to individual goals as well, right?
Absolutely. Doerr actually dedicates a whole section of Measure What Matters to what he calls the new world of work. He talks about how OKRs can be used for personal growth and development.
Oh, tell me more about that. I'm always looking for ways to level up.
Well, one of the key ideas he discusses is continuous performance management, or CFRs. It's basically a shift away from the traditional annual performance review, that once-a-year thing that everyone dreads.
Yeah, those can be pretty stressful.
They can be.
Yeah.
CFRs are about having more frequent, ongoing feedback and coaching conversations.
So instead of waiting a whole year to get feedback, you're getting regular check-ins and guidance. That sounds way more effective for identifying areas for improvement and staying on track.
It is. And Doerr uses a great example of this with Adobe. They actually got rid of their annual reviews altogether. They replaced them with these regular check-in conversations.
Wow, they completely ditched the annual reviews.
They did. And you know what? It led to a significant decrease in voluntary attrition.
That's amazing. So not only can these CFRs help with personal growth, they can actually improve employee satisfaction and retention.
Exactly. It's a win-win for everyone involved. CFRs create this culture of continuous learning and growth. Instead of just focusing on past performance, you're constantly adjusting, course-correcting, and developing throughout the year.
This whole idea of continuous improvement, it seems to be a recurring theme in Measure What Matters.
It really is. And Doerr has this fascinating example with Zoom Pizza. They're known for using robots to make pizza, but what's really interesting is their approach to personal development. They actually dedicate regular one-on-one meetings, not to work tasks, but to personal growth.
Wait, so they're not talking about pizza. They're talking about their employees' personal goals and aspirations.
Exactly. It's about investing in the people who make those pizzas.
That's pretty remarkable.
It is. And these one-on-one meetings aren't about checking off to-do lists. They're about helping each individual identify their long-term aspirations and create a plan to achieve them.
It's amazing to see a company prioritize personal growth alongside their business objectives.
It really speaks to their values-driven culture. They understand that when people feel supported and empowered to grow, everyone benefits.
So how do these meetings actually work? Do they just sit down and chat about their dreams?
Well, they use specific questions to guide the conversation. They encourage employees to think about what truly energizes them, what drains their energy. It's about understanding personal motivations and identifying areas where they can thrive.
It's so easy to get caught up in the daily grind,
Yeah, sure.
to lose sight of what really motivates us. It sounds like these questions help bring that focus back.
They do. And they help connect those personal aspirations with the company's mission.
Okay, so we've talked about personal growth, but let's zoom back out to the organizational level. Doerr also talks a lot about the importance of aligning company culture with OKRs, right?
He does. It's not just about setting goals. It's about creating an environment where those goals can thrive.
Makes sense.
Yeah.
So what kind of culture supports successful OKRs?
Well, he uses the example of Coursera, the online education platform. They very explicitly connected their OKRs to their company values and mission, which is to create a world where anyone, anywhere, can transform their lives through access to the best learning experiences.
I love that mission.
It's a great one. And their OKRs aren't about hitting some arbitrary numbers. They're about making a tangible impact on the world by expanding access to education.
It seems like the most successful companies, the ones that really make a difference, they have that strong sense of purpose. They have a clear mission, and they use OKRs to align their efforts and actually achieve those goals.
Absolutely. And then you have companies like Lumeris, a healthcare technology company. Doerr talks about the challenges they faced after a merger.
Merging companies is always tough.
It is. And in Lumeris's case, they were merging two organizations with very different cultures, which created a lot of friction.
I can imagine. Different cultures can really clash.
They can. And the CEO, Mike Long, he recognized this. He set this really bold OKR: institute a culture that attracts and retains A players.
So it wasn't just about integrating systems and processes. It was about addressing the cultural divide.
Exactly. They completely revamped their hiring process. They retrained everyone involved in interviewing, and they really focused on creating this culture of learning and development.
So it was a top-down approach, driven by leadership, but with very clear objectives and key results to guide the process.
Right. And it wasn't just about policies and procedures. It was about shifting mindsets and behaviors, creating an environment where everyone felt valued, empowered, and motivated.
Did it work?
It did. They saw huge improvements in employee satisfaction, retention, and overall performance.
That's fantastic.
Yeah.
It shows how powerful that combination of leadership, culture, and a commitment to continuous improvement can be.
It does. And that brings us to another really important point Doerr makes: the importance of radical candor.
Radical candor.
Yeah.
I've heard that term before, but I'm not sure I fully grasped it.
Well, it's about creating a culture of open and honest feedback. A culture where people feel comfortable sharing their perspectives, even if it means challenging ideas. A place where they can offer constructive criticism without fear of repercussions.
So it's about having those tough conversations, but doing it in a way that's respectful, constructive, and ultimately, it's about helping everyone grow.
Exactly. Doerr emphasizes that it's not about being brutally honest or insensitive. It's about caring personally, but challenging directly.
It sounds like it takes a lot of trust to create that kind of environment.
It does. You need a high level of trust and psychological safety for radical candor to really work.
Now, we've talked a lot about areas for improvement and challenging ourselves, but it's also important to celebrate successes, right?
Absolutely. Celebrating those wins, whether they're big or small, is crucial. It boosts morale. It fosters a sense of accomplishment. It keeps everyone motivated. It's about recognizing and appreciating the progress we've made along the way.
Yeah, it's easy to get so focused on the next goal, the next milestone, that we forget to pause and appreciate how far we've come.
It is. And that actually leads to another key element Doerr highlights in the book: the power of storytelling.
Storytelling, I love a good story. But how does that fit into the world of OKRs?
Well, Doerr believes that stories are an incredibly powerful way to communicate goals. They inspire action. They help connect people to a shared purpose. Think about the stories we've discussed today. Google Chrome, the Gates Foundation, YouTube. These aren't just about numbers and metrics. They're about human ingenuity, determination. They're about the pursuit of audacious goals.
And those stories make the goals more relatable, more inspiring. They help us understand the why behind the numbers.
Exactly. And the great thing about storytelling is that you can use it at any level, whether you're a CEO communicating a company-wide vision or an individual sharing your personal goals with a friend.
It's a powerful tool. Well, as we wrap up this part of our deep dive, I'm reminded of a question Doerr poses in the book. What's your story?
That's a great question to reflect on. We all have a unique story, our own experiences and aspirations that shape who we are. And OKRs can be this incredible framework for writing that story, for defining our goals, and for making a meaningful impact on the world. So we've explored a lot, the core concepts of OKRs, those superpowers, and how they can apply to all sorts of goals, both personal and professional. But now I think it's time to get a little more practical. Let's dive into some tips for actually implementing OKRs effectively. One of the key things that Doerr really hammers home is the importance of leadership commitment.
Yeah, that makes sense. I mean, it's hard to imagine any kind of initiative succeeding without buy-in from the top. But what does leadership commitment actually look like when we're talking about OKRs?
Well, it goes beyond just announcing, hey, we're doing OKRs now. Leaders need to actually walk the walk. They need to participate in the process, set their own objectives and key results, and be open about sharing their progress and challenges. It's about showing that they're truly committed to the system and that they're holding themselves accountable, just like everyone else.
So leading by example is crucial.
Got it.
But it's not just about the CEO or the executive team, right?
Right. For OKRs to really work, leadership at all levels needs to be on board. Managers, team leads, everyone. It's about creating that culture where OKRs are just woven into how the organization operates.
Okay, so you've got leadership on board. How do you get everyone else excited about OKRs? How do you make sure it doesn't just feel like another top-down initiative?
Communication and transparency are key. Doerr talks about how important it is to clearly explain the why behind OKRs. Help people understand the purpose, what's in it for them, what are the benefits. And it's also about involving everyone in the process, from setting those objectives to tracking progress and celebrating those successes.
Right, when people feel like they have a voice, like they're actually part of something, they're going to be way more engaged.
Absolutely. And remember, transparency is huge. When everyone can see those objectives and key results, it builds accountability and encourages collaboration. It's about creating that shared understanding, that sense of collective ownership.
Okay, so we've got leadership commitment, clear communication, and transparency. What else is crucial for making sure those OKRs are actually successful?
Doerr stresses starting small and iterating along the way. It's about figuring out what works best for your specific context, whether it's a whole company or just one person working on their own goals.
So don't try to boil the ocean, right? Start with something manageable and build from there.
That's it. And don't be afraid to experiment. Adjust, make mistakes along the way. The key is to learn from those experiences and keep refining how you approach OKRs.
It's a process, not a one-time thing.
Exactly. And Doerr tells a really interesting story about Bono and his organization, One. They're dedicated to fighting extreme poverty, and they actually struggled with OKRs at first.
Really? What happened?
Well, their goals were so big, so ambitious, that they ended up spreading themselves too thin.
Yeah, I could see how that would be a challenge, especially with something as complex as ending poverty.
It is. But ultimately, OKRs helped them refine their approach. They were able to focus on the initiatives that would have the most impact and measure their progress in a more meaningful way.
So even with a massive goal like that, OKRs can help you break it down and make real progress.
Exactly.
Well, we've covered a lot of ground in this deep dive. As we wrap things up, are there any final takeaways you want to leave our listeners with?
I'd say the biggest takeaway is this. OKRs are a system for achieving those really audacious goals. Don't be afraid to dream big. Challenge yourself to do something remarkable.
Love it. Aim high.
Exactly. And second, prioritize transparency and communication. Make those objectives and key results visible and be open about sharing your progress, both the good and the bad. It fosters that culture of accountability and collaboration.
Transparency builds trust. It brings people together.
And third, focus on continuous improvement. Don't just set your goals and forget about them. Regularly review your progress, get feedback, and make those adjustments. That iterative process is how you grow, how you succeed.
It's about the journey, right? And always striving to be better.
That's it.
Well, I got to say, this has been a really insightful deep dive into measure what matters. I feel like I have a much better grasp of OKRs now, and I'm definitely feeling inspired to use them in my own life.
That's great to hear. And remember, measure what matters is just the starting point. There are tons of resources out there to help you really dig in and implement OKRs effectively.
Absolutely.
So explore, experiment, and most importantly, take action.
Couldn't have said it better myself. And that's a wrap on this episode of Books on a Mic. A huge thank you to our expert for all the incredible insights and for guiding us through this deep dive.
It was my pleasure.
And to all our listeners, thank you so much for joining us. Remember, don't just let those dreams stay dreams. Take action. Use the power of OKRs and make those aspirations a reality. We'll be back next week with another deep dive into a brand new book. Until then, keep learning, keep growing, and keep measuring what matters.